Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with a little bit of common sense. Today we're going to be diving back into the ideologies, and in order to get there, we're going to have to go through several of the works of Bertrand Russell. Now, my internet's been out for 2 days, and so I don't have the ability to pull up the wiki and do the history, but all that you really need to know about Bertrand Russell is he was extremely privileged throughout his entire life. His parents were well-to-do. He lost one of his parents and then the other one, and then he went to live with his grandmother, who also was well-to-do, and it led him into a life of extreme privilege for all of his life. And so, like many who were born into privilege, he has no understanding of what it took for his predecessors to give that to him. And so, we are going to dive into his work called In Praise of Idleness, because it is cached on my computer and I can pull that up without having to get on the internet like I do for my other works. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things I do. Before you attack me for anything that I might say in here, you should probably at least peruse a few of these playlists to understand that I am a capitalist, but I am not some die-hard elite capitalism or nothing. I have some unconventional beliefs. But with all of that being said, we are going to dive into and tear apart Bertrand Russell in praise of idleness. Now, this is a series. We're going to take it a piece at a time. This is the first in the series, so let us dive in and begin. In Praise of Idleness by Bertrand Russell. Also, in part, this is vocal therapy. You're both going to have to listen to my voice do a little bit of weird things and put up with me drinking my tea, which is supposed to help with that. All right. In Praise of Idleness. Like most of my generation, I was brought up on the saying, "Satan finds some mischief still for idle hands to do." Being a highly virtuous child, I believed all that I was told, and I do not doubt that he considered himself a highly virtuous child, because he has no problem virtue signaling every single chance that he has. He takes that virtue flag and he flies it. I am better than you every single chance he gets, and we will see evidence of that. I believed all that I was told and acquired a conscience which has kept me working hard down to the present moment. Go read his wiki. He did not work hard ever in his entire life. But although my conscience has controlled my actions, my opinions have undergone a revolution. I think there is far too much work done in the world, that immense harm is caused by the belief that work is virtuous, and that what needs to be preached in modern industrial countries is quite different from what always has been preached. No. Everyone knows the story of the traveler in Naples who saw 12 beggars lying in the sun. It was before the days of Mussolini, and offered a lira to the laziest of them. 11 of them jumped up to claim it, so he gave it to the 12th. This traveler was on the right lines, but in countries which do not enjoy the Mediterranean sunshine, idleness is more difficult, and a great public propaganda will be required to inaugurate it. I hope that, after reading the following pages, the leaders of the YMCA will start a campaign to induce good young men to do nothing. If so, I shall have not lived in vain. You have lived in vain, because idleness has its virtues, and I am sure he is going to expound upon them. But you are not meant to be idle by nature. You should absolutely take recreation time, which was a problem back then, right? They were working people this was before labor laws were really in effect. I'm not sure on the exact timing, and I can't look it up, but this is around the time of unionization and the reform in the work ethic down to the 40-day work week, or the 40-hour work week, and things along that nature. Vacation being part of it and all of that. And so, in part, back when they were working people to death, yes, they needed more idleness. But You're not meant to be idle. You are meant to strive, to grow, to do, and to be. You are here for an experience. You are here to learn, and there is really not a whole lot of learning in idleness. Now, I can make this argument because I have been forced into idleness, right? My injury has forced me into idleness, and I have not been idle at all. I have spent the entirety of the time learning how to do new things, expanding my perceptions and my horizon, and doing things like we are doing here, and improving myself in various ways. I have not been idle even when I was forced into idleness. So I am a proponent of action. A big one. It has affected change in my life in very real, measurable ways. And while it is great, you should take recreation. That should absolutely be a part of your life. You should kick back and do something that you enjoy simply for the fact that you enjoy it. But that should not be your life. It shouldn't. You should be striving to work as hard as you can, right? Take your time off, but work when you're at work as hard as you possibly can. You shouldn't be scrolling on Facebook while you're on the clock. That is theft. And so I want to be very clear where I stand on that before we dive into where he is. I believe in ethical capitalism, even though it has not been enacted any more than communism or socialism have been enacted in any measurable, effective way, right? Everybody well, that's not real socialism. That's not real communism. That is the sentiment, right? Well, I say that capitalism has not been done in the correct way either. If you are making $1 million a year, just as a good round number, and you have people working for minimum wage, you are a full-on piece of shit. Like a full-on, no-holds-barred piece of shit. If you have people working for longer than a year on minimum wage, you're a piece of shit. Doesn't matter what argument you make in the opposite. If you are making $200,000 and your employees are on minimum wage, you're still a piece of shit, right? You should be striving to advance your workers' lives. That is ethical capitalism. I'm going to take the fruits of my labors and invest it in others so that we have more fruit. Fertilize the fields. That is ethical capitalism. It's not the government telling you to do it. It's you understanding that it is something you should be doing. It is a private decision. It is neither capitalism nor socialism. And it is structured. It works within the law. So it is not anarcho-capitalism. It is ethical capitalism. And that is where I stand. I don't believe that it has been enacted. I want to be the first one. I don't care if that sounds heady. I know that I can do it. I don't see it being done. Now, we do see some examples of it, right? Some people who are billionaires are paying their people well. They are taking care of them. They are investing in their health insurance and their pensions. That does still happen. And those people are doing it the right way. Could they be doing it better? Possibly, but I'm not here to judge that. I'm here to judge those who are like McDonald's, right? McDonald's banks upon keeping people at minimum wage. And while that should be an entry-level position for teenagers and people just entering the workforce to learn how to work, as long as you have a law that says this is the least amount that you can pay a human being for doing work, it is never going to be enough because there are no ethics involved in that. You are simply following the law. McDonald's definitely has a healthy enough profit margin that they could pay more than minimum wage for most of their workers. That is not to say that everybody should be getting above minimum wage. If you are minimum effort, minimum skills, you get minimum wage. Minimum wage is there for people to get a beginning in the workplace. You should not be able to rent a house by yourself on minimum wage. You shouldn't. That is not what it is for. You should not be planning on spending the rest of your life on minimum wage. That is you problem, not a them problem. If you are making minimum wage for longer than a year, it is your problem. I say that because I have never, I made minimum wage in one job my entire life. It was delivering pizzas when I was a senior in high school. As soon as I graduated, I went to making almost double of minimum wage. I went immediately into another job. Now, I joined the military, and that is well below the minimum wage. But after that, I came out and I went into the plants. I didn't work minimum wage yet again. I have not worked a minimum wage job in 30 years, over 30 years. I'm getting old. And so I say that minimum wage is there to keep people from forcing labor, right? It is basically slavery. But if you are on minimum wage for longer than a year, it is you, not them. All right, I think I made my position clear so that when I dispute things in this, you understand where I am coming from. So let us dive back into the text. Before advancing my own arguments for laziness, I must dispose of one which I cannot accept. Whenever a person who already has enough to live on proposes to engage in some everyday kind of job, such as school teaching or typing, he or she is told that such conduct takes the bread out of other people's mouths and is therefore wicked. If this argument were valid, it would only be necessary for us to be idle in order that we should all have our mouths full of bread. What people who say such things forget is that what a man earns he usually spends, and in spending he gives employment. As long as a man spends his income, he puts just as much bread into people's mouths in spending as he takes out of other people's mouths in earning. Wait. Whenever a person who already has enough to live on proposes to engage in some job, no, we don't do that nowadays. Maybe it was common back then, right? You're not taking this is a scarcity mindset, which is victim mentality, right? This is saying that if I make more, then you can't have enough, and that is not true. It's saying that if I take this job, somebody else is going to be deprived of a job, and that is not true. There are other opportunities. You can begin your own business. You can go to work in a different area. You can move. There are opportunities. This is victim mentality. This is saying that because of this situation, there is no other option. That is not true. That is just simply not true. Okay. Right here. The real villain, from this point of view, is the man who saves. If he merely puts his savings in a stocking, like the proverbial French peasant, it is obvious that they do not give employment. If he invests his savings, the matter is less obvious and different cases arise. So you're arguing against personal property, right? My decisions for my money affects me and me alone. Me putting money away does not take anything out of your mouth. I am still spending for my needs and my necessity, which is your argument here. And so I am still putting money back into the economy, but I am providing for myself and future plans. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. That is one of the reasons why I argue so hard against the eat the rich mentality, because that is, for one, fucking stupid. But for two, what happens when you, through fortuitousness, strike upon success, and then all of a sudden you're on the wrong side of that equation? Well, who sets the arbitrary line between what the cap on an earning is and what the return should be, right? I say in ethical capitalism that you make the decision. I am making enough to pay all of my bills. Let me see where I can reinvest in my company or reinvest in my people or improve conditions in some way, right? That should be a decision that you make for yourself. And if you don't make that decision, I'm going to choose not to do business with you. That is how capitalism should work. One of the commonest things to do with savings is to lend them to some government. That is not exactly true. The way that this works is that they issue a security bond, which says that if you buy this piece of paper for $100 right now, then in 10 years it will be worth $1,000. That is a repayment. That is an interest plan. That is not just, here, take this government. Yes, I guess it is kind of lending it, but it's not, right? You are investing in a return. Lending would be more like, here, you use this and give it back to me, right? You can add interest onto that, but that gets into usury and all of that, right? Which is the same thing, kind of. But the framing here is where I take the problem, right? You are issuing a security bond, and we buy the security bond. That is purchasing a product with the expectation that there will be value in that product at the end. That is not just some arbitrary, well, I've got a little bit of money, let me give it to the government, right? That is an investment opportunity. That is you putting your money to work for you, which is capitalism. In view of the fact that the bulk of the public expenditure of most civilized governments consists in payment for past wars or preparation for future wars, the man who lends his money to a government is in the same position as the bad men in Shakespeare who hire murderers. And again, he was a pacifist, right, his entire life. That is going to shadow things. He was a pacifist against World War I. He was a pacifist against World War II. He was an advocate of appeasement of Hitler. That is a real thing. And so, I don't believe in wars, right? For the most part. I have been involved in 2 combat deployments when I was in the military. I did not see action, but I was there. I got the hazard duty pay. I got the ribbons to prove it. And so I was there. I understand some of the things that were going on. Neither of the 2 combat situations that I was in was necessarily justified. Most of the action that we have been in since I was in the military has not necessarily been justified. There have been lies sold. I am not a proponent of war. I think that war should be a defensive maneuver to the extreme. No one should be offensive. But if you are offensive, I believe that everybody should come together and smack you the fuck down quickly, without all of this long drawn out 20-year engagement in this land that nobody even really wants, right? Have Iraq. And then so now we do spend entirely too much money on war. Entirely too much money. There are many things that we can invest that money in that would be much better as a government. But also bear in mind, this is before the interstate system. And one of the arguments that you hear most often is, if we didn't pay taxes, we wouldn't have roads. And that is an absolute fucking truth. You don't have to like that. I know many people are not. But the fact of the matter is that you probably will not fix your road. Like the one little spot in front of your house, you will probably not spend the money on it. And if you are the exception to the rule and you will maintain your little section of roadway, your neighbor's not. Your neighbor's not going to do it. They don't cut their grass, right? They don't pick up their trash. They don't do things already. What makes you think that they're going to invest in a roadway that they only use part of the time? They're not going to do it. But we can pay taxes, which is a privilege, and that privilege allows us to pay someone else to build our roads. People complain about the inefficiency, and that is a valid complaint, but most of them do not even understand the technicalities of building a road. They do not understand the substructure of the road. They do not understand planning base courses and compacting limestone. They don't understand bringing in sand layers. They do not understand why there's 2 layers of asphalt that go into a road. They do not understand the basics of it. They don't understand why we have the regulations that we do. I do. I worked in that industry. I know intricately what is involved in building roads. And most of you are not going to pay for it. And I have a great example of that. I live in the state of Louisiana, right down the road from ExxonMobil, the 2nd largest refinery in the entirety of the country. It has the largest private roads in the state of Louisiana. They are all contained within the gate at ExxonMobil here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And you want to know what the thing about them roads is? It benefits absolutely nobody but ExxonMobil for them roads to be in the best shape possible. They have the money to do it. They have the capital to invest in their own roads. They have some shitty roads. You cannot do 5 miles an hour, which is the speed limit on them. You can't do that because there are too many potholes. There are too many cracks. There are too many breaks. It's out of level. It's out of square. Like, there are so many problems with these private roads inside this one example. It benefits absolutely no one but them for this to be efficient. It would not cost them much in the grand scope of their economics, but they won't do it. Until there is a problem where it's breaking axles or causing tires to bust, they're not even fixing potholes. They've got people out there pouring concrete almost every day. They have concrete roads. They won't fix the roads. That is the same problem that you are going to face if they get rid of taxes. We won't even get into schools. We won't even get into plumbing infrastructure, which is a thing. You think your water just comes from nowheres? Like, all of these things your taxes go into. And is there waste in taxes? Abso-fucking-lutely. Should we be holding them accountable for that? Absolutely. But are you going to invest in your roads? Fuck no. It's not going to happen. The net results of man's economical habits is to increase the armed forces of the state to which he lends his savings. Obviously, it would be better if he spent the money, even if he spent it on drink or gambling. But I shall be told the case is quite different when savings are invested in industrial enterprises. When such enterprises succeed and produce something useful, this may be conceded. In these days, however, no one will deny that most enterprises fail. Yes, that is intricately involved in why you get a return on your investment when it succeeds. Because it is a gamble. You would be better if you spent it in drinking and gambling. You're gambling on economic success in the industry that you're investing in. If you think that cell phones are the future back in 1990 and you invest your money in Nokia, guess what? You got a return. Right? But if you thought that Blockbuster was the wave of the future in 2020 or 2015, whenever it was they disabled, you lost your money. That is how the market works. Now, the stock market, for the most part, I don't necessarily agree with. The buy and sell that drives it up and down and it forces these profit, right? The main problem with capitalism as it stands is the necessity to year over year produce a greater profit, right? It is literally a legal requirement to make more money this year than you did last year. That is most of the problem. That is most of the problem because, well, we cannot take this money that we made the profit on and disperse it amongst our employees, because if we do, then our profits will not be as high as they were last year. It could be a 1% difference. You would be under by 1%. But you're not going to raise the wages of your employees with that money because it would be a 1% less investment return than the previous year, and then you're legally obligated. Right? That is the problem. We should do this with the full understanding that it is a risk. And if there is money left over after taking care of the employees who are building this, then that is what gets distributed. That is, again, an ethical issue. That means that the large amount of human labor, which might have been devoted to producing something that could be enjoyed, was expended on producing machines, which, when produced, lay idle and did no good to anyone. And again, that is a risk. That is something that you take a risk on. I have started several ventures, right? If you were unaware, both before and after my injury, I tried to do something different. I wrote a book, which is a venture. I started a blacksmith shop with someone else doing most of the labor. I've done several other things, right? Like, I try. They don't all succeed. That is my fault, right? That is either I didn't research the market correctly, or I didn't put in the correct effort, or I didn't market myself in the correct manner. All of those things are on me. But I made the investment in it. Now, if I would have went to 20 of my friends and said, hey, can you give me $5,000 and we will invest in this and you will get a return on your money? If that fails, we're all out of money. If I go and I say, you know what, I'm going to try and make t-shirts, which is a big thing that people do. And I go and I buy a press machine and I buy the printer and all of those things, and nobody buys the t-shirts. I'm out of money. I bought these things and it's lying idle. That is not inherently bad. That is just the market at work. Either you have the drive to get it done in the way that it needs to be done, or you don't. I have failed a lot. I have endeavored and it did not work, and so I swapped to a different endeavor. That is how it works. That is how you find your niche. That is how you find your market. That is how you find your success, is by not giving up when things don't quite work out the way that you want them to. And sometimes that means that you invest in a machine that just sits idle. Again, it comes down to you, not the state. The man who invests in savings in a concern that goes bankrupt is therefore injuring others as well as himself. That is not true. That is, like, in the long run, you can make that argument that, yeah, he could have spent that money helping the homeless, right? But what's going to happen? They're going to take that money and they're going to remain homeless, because most of the people who are homeless choose that life. That is something that sets people off, but it is true. They're the idle ones. They're the ones that you are arguing for. right? If he spent his money, say, in giving parties for his friends, they, we may hope, would get pleasure, and so would all those upon whom he spent his money, such as the butcher, the baker, and the bootlegger. This was during Prohibition. But if he spends it, let us say, upon laying down rails for surface cars in some place where surface cars turn out to not be wanted, he has diverted a mass of labor into channels where it gives pleasure to no one. That is a bad investment, but it is not world-ending, right? And this is an argument for, I know how to spend your money better than you do, right? This is taking away personal property, personal responsibility, and personal choice all in one fell swoop. Yeah, you're a fucking genius. Nevertheless, when he becomes poor through the failure of his investment, he will be regarded as a victim of undeserved misfortune. No, he will probably just try and find and do something different. Whereas the gay spendthrift, and that means happy, not homosexual, who has spent his money philanthropically, will be despised as a fool and a frivolous person. No, nobody says that people who spend their money philanthropically are despised as a fool and a frivolous person. I don't know of anyone who says that. People who give to charity. Are you kidding me? All this is only preliminary. I want to say, and in all seriousness, that a great deal of harm is being done in the modern world by belief in the virtuousness of work, and that the road to happiness and prosperity lies in an organized diminution of work. First of all, what is work? Work is of two kinds. First, altering the position of matter at or near the Earth's surface relatively to other such matter. Second, telling other people to do so. They call this dude a genius? Are you fucking kidding me? The first kind is unpleasant and ill-paid, ethics concern. The second is pleasant and highly paid, ethics concern. The second kind is capable of indefinite extension. Okay, hold on. If you are not successful, nobody is going to listen to you when you tell them to move this dirt from here to there. But if you are successful and you have the capacity to pay them to do it, they're going to do it. It is not that it is some pleasant and unpleasant. It means that you have the skills to make the job get done. It takes effort to plan a job. It takes effort to execute the job on a supervisory level, and that is something that idle people who run for office only in places where they cannot win, which is how Bertrand Russell lived his life, right? He only ran for office if he was sure that he was not going to win it, but he was definitely in the club. So he had no ability to actively be successful outside of his writing, right? Even his mathematics, which he has the most credit for, was through collaboration with other people who had the idea that he clarified, right? That is not coming up with your own thing. That is not creating your own thing. That is taking this collaboration and taking the credit for it. That's what Bertrand Russell did. But yeah, blame it on the man who's got the ability to make the choices to do the successful thing. That's always going to lead to more success. That is not what caused the Holodomor at all, right there. There are not only those who give orders, but those who give advice as to what kind of orders should be given. Usually, two opposite kinds of advice are given simultaneously by two organized bodies of men. This is called politics. That is, politics is not work. Politics is not work, and this is also not true. Right? There are instances where there are contradicting opinions on the execution of a project. That is true. But for the most part, if I have a road construction company and I call in a consultant, it is going to be like what I did was test, right? I took the materials and ensured that they met the specifications for the requirements of the road. I took the materials that were the substratum of the road and made sure that they were sufficient to bear the weight and the stress, right? So my recommendations are what he is talking about here. What I did was run tests, and those tests gave me things that told me whether it met or failed the requirements. My recommendations that were given from that were based upon whether it met or failed the requirements and what remedy could be done in that situation. That was me entirely in a supervisory position. Now, I did manual labor when I was doing this, right? I physically ran the test, but I was the lab manager. I was the guy recording the results. I was the guy making sure that they were done in the correct manner. And so I had a small level of expertise at this. And so my recommendations, take them or leave them, were given. But there was another company, independent of me, right? I worked for the contractor, the other company worked for the state. If I worked for the state, the other contractor works for the company. Either way, our orders, our things, were unanimous 99.9% of the time. When there was a dispute, it was on the remedy of the situation. I would say add lime, and the other one would say just aggregate the soil and let it dry out on its own. These are two different ways to achieve the same thing. It is not contradictory. If you are constantly getting contradictory advice, two opposite kinds of advice given simultaneously, you are consulting the wrong experts. It is not in business that you often get that. You do in politics. Now, politics is me arguing my belief system. It is you arguing your belief system. And those can be widely different, right? I don't believe in communism. Some people do. I argue against it. Some people argue for it. That is contradictory. I give my congressman advice. Hey, we need capitalism. You give the same congressman advice. Hey, we need communism. That is what is being described here. That's in politics. That's where this dude lived. He didn't live in the real world. He wasn't running tests. He wasn't building roads. He wasn't farming. He wasn't doing any of that. He lived a life of extreme luxury for the entirety of his life. The skill required for this kind of work is not knowledge of the subject as to which advice is given, but knowledge of the art of persuasive speaking and writing, an example of advertising. And again, this is making a false equivocation, right? Building the straw man to attack. Well, it's really just this weak argument, not really this stronger one, right? I try to steel man things. I really do. I know it may not seem that way because of what we are doing here, but that is for reasons. There is no steel manning his argument. It just doesn't work, right? You're logically inconsistent all the way through this. You are bringing in all of the fallacies, not just one or two. Throughout Europe, though not in America, there is a third class of men more respected than either of the classes of workers. There are men who, through ownership of land, are able to make others pay for the privilege of being allowed to exist and to work. These landowners are idle, and I might therefore be expected to praise them. Unfortunately, their idleness is only rendered possible by the industry of others. Indeed, their desire for comfortable idleness is historically the source of the whole gospel of work. The last thing they have ever wished is that others should follow their example. Now, this is talking about nobility, right? Not in America, but in other places. They pay for the privilege of being allowed to exist and to work. That has been reformed for the most part, under my understanding. There are very few places left that it is the nobility that is really even shot callers. Most of the land has been privatized, even in places like Europe or in Britain, right? That is not to say that all of the land has. There is still nobility, and I think, honestly, nobility is pretty shit, right? They do not do what I say, and therefore I have problems with them. I believe in ethical capitalism. I believe in putting your money to work in ethical, beneficial ways for everyone involved, and for the most part, they are just sitting idle, and I have a problem with that. Right? Just sitting on money doesn't really do anything. But I'm not here to tell you you have to spend your money. I'm telling you that you should spend your money. From the beginning of civilization until the Industrial Revolution, a man could, as a rule, produce by hard work little more than was required for the subsistence of himself and his family, although his wife worked at least as hard as he did, and his children added their labor as soon as they were old enough to do so. The small surplus above bare necessities was not left to those who produced it, but was appropriated by warriors and priests. And I want to point out that this was not capitalism, right? It wasn't. It was nobility. It was fiefdom. It was slavery in the most part, right? You weren't allowed, back before the American Revolution, you weren't allowed to just move. You had to ask permission from someone else if you wanted to move 20 miles down the road or 100 miles down the road. You had to ask permission to do that. You belonged to somebody. They had to agree to let you go. And I don't agree with that shit at all, right? I don't believe anyone is intrinsically of more value than others. I believe that you can be more valuable than others, but that is through your hard work and your efforts, your ability to invest in things that are beneficial. That, I believe, entitles you to acquire things, but not to force someone to work for you, right? Like we definitely saw with the nobility, right? Serfdom was a thing, and even after serfdom, it was barely better, right? So this argument I do actually agree with, but we've done away with that for the most part without making people idle. It's funny how that works. As a matter of fact, the more people who were able to work and compete freely drove the wages up more. It's funny how that works. In times of famine, there was no surplus. The warriors and priests, however, still secured as much as at other times, with the result that many of the workers died of hunger. This system persisted in Russia until 1917 and still persists in the East. In England, in spite of the Industrial Revolution, it remained in full force throughout the Napoleonic Wars and until 100 years ago, when the new class of manufacturers acquired power. In America, the system came to an end with the Revolution, except in the South where it persisted until the Civil War. A system which lasted so long and ended so recently has naturally left a profound impress upon men's thoughts and opinions. Much that we take for granted about the desirability of work is derived from this system and, being pre-industrial, is not adapted to the modern world. Modern technique has made it possible for leisure, within limits, to be not the prerogative of a small, privileged class, but a right, evenly distributed throughout the community. The morality of work is the morality of slaves, and the modern world has no need of slavery. I do agree, the modern world has no need of slavery, but working is not slavery. You are meant to work, and that is not even a religious thing for me, right? I don't hold with the Bible. If you are unfamiliar, the Unconventional Bible Study is 161 videos of me leaving Christianity by reading the Bible. But man intrinsically wants the best for himself and for those around him, unless he is taught otherwise, right? You have a natural desire to succeed. You are taught not to by the people around you. Well, and I don't run unless somebody's chasing me. I'm not going to work that hard. He makes $1, I make a dime. That's why I shit on company time, right? That type of mentality right there is the problem, right? You should be thoroughly engaged, and by being thoroughly engaged, you increase your value. Your value increases, so you get paid more. That is capitalism, right? Slavery has no part in capitalism. It should not be a thing, even though there is still places today in 2025 where you can go and buy a human being in the open air, not even in some shady background market, but like in literal slave markets. Thank you, Obama. It is obvious that, in primitive communities, peasants, left to themselves, would not have parted with the slender surplus upon which the warriors and priests subsisted, but would have either produced less or consumed more. Or they could have stored it up. That is an option too. But here's the thing. If you're not paying for warriors, you are going to be invaded. That is a simple truth, and the argument that, well, everybody could just live with no government is fucking dumb. That is not ever going to be a thing. Even when people were peasants, there was a structure to government. Before there was nobility, there was a structure to communities. There was a chief or a wise man or a group of elders or somebody who made the decisions for the community. Anytime there is a community, there will be a hierarchy. That hierarchy enables decisions to be made on a level that is effective. That also is capitalism. It's not socialism, right? The government is kind of making the choice, but it is through the will of the people. At first, sheer force compelled them to produce and part with the surplus. Gradually, however, it was found possible to induce many of them to accept an ethic according to which it was their duty to work hard, although part of their work went to support others in idleness. By this means, the amount of compulsion required was lessened and the expenses of the government were diminished. To this day, 99% of British wage earners would be genuinely shocked if it were proposed that the king should not have a larger income than a working man. The conception of duty, speaking historically, has been a means used by the holders of power to induce others to live for the interest of their masters rather than for their own. Of course, the holders of power conceal this fact from themselves by managing to believe that their interests are identical with the larger interest of humanity. Sometimes it is true. Athenian slave owners, for instance, employed part of their leisure in making a permanent contribution to civilization which would have been impossible under a just economic system. Leisure is essential to civilization, and in former times leisure for the few was only rendered possible by the labors of the many. But their labors were valuable, not because work is good, but because leisure is good. Fucking stupid. And with modern technique, it would be possible to distribute leisure justly without injury to civilization. To distribute leisure. So I'm going to tell you that you have to sit down and read a book for 2 hours. Modern technique has made it possible to diminish enormously the amount of labor required to secure the necessaries of life for everyone. This was made obvious during the war. At that time, all the men in the armed forces, all the men and women engaged in the production of munitions, all the men and women engaged in spying, war propaganda, or government offices connected with the war, were withdrawn from productive occupations. And see, again, those are productive, right? Producing munitions to stop the genocide of a people, that's pretty fucking productive, right? What else he got here? The men and women engaged in spying, knowing what enemy troop movements at danger to your own life, productive. War propaganda, all right, you kind of got this one. Or government offices connected with the war, so we should not be overseeing where those things go, right? Now this is, I believe, the timing on this is between the First and the Second World War. So ensuring that we have battleships, that's no big deal. We can just make sure somebody will take care of that in the private market, I'm sure, or maybe the government. In spite of this, the general level of physical well-being among unskilled wage earners on the side of the Allies was higher than before or since. The significance of this fact was concealed by finance. Borrowing made it appear as if the future was nourishing the present, but that, of course, would have been impossible. A man cannot eat a loaf of bread that does not yet exist. The war showed conclusively that, by the scientific organization of production, it is possible to keep modern populations in fair comfort on a small part of the working capacity of the modern world. Full motherfucking stop on this one. My grandmother was born in 1909. She has since passed, so we can't go to her for the evidence, but I talked with her often about her life growing up, and she lived in poverty, right? You want to know when the hardest points of those poverty were? In World War I and World War II. You want to know why? Because most of the effort was going over there. There was not enough people because we sent our men to die. So women had to go to work to help with the low workforce, which, by the way, has caused several repercussions in our societal structure over time. But we did not have enough people to meet all of the requirements here. You know what they did? They gave you a book of stamps and said, here is your 1 pound of meat for the fucking month. Make do. Here's 1 pound of sugar for the next 2 weeks. Make do. That is what they did to the people here. We sent a lot of stuff overseas. Yeah, sure, okay. Even those people did not eat well. Right? Our people on the front line, they weren't eating well. We were sending a lot of food over there. They were eating the things that we sent, but it was not calorie sufficient. Most of them come back severely underweight. We sent them all of our clothing and our textiles and things of that nature, and they still did not have enough warmth in the winters, right? Go back and read some fucking history. Now, this guy was privileged. He come from the aristocracy, people with nobility, titles in their name. He had a fucking title. He was not affected by that. The people with the money, in the government, the people in charge of shit, they still got theirs. People like my grandmother, they were on a book of stamps. And that book of stamps allowed them to get food occasionally. But in order to get those stamps, you had to contribute to the war effort. You had to round up scrap steel, or you had to bring in pork lard, or whatever your particular part of the rationing required. That was reality. Now, we're in a different place here. Our industrialization is much better, so we don't see the deprivation from the forever wars that we fight. But it's the same thing. We would be better off if we were not fighting the wars. I fully cognize that. I recognize that. I enhance that. I endorse that. We should not be in as many wars. But to intimate that the war showed that we could live in comfort, that's fucking dumb. If, at the end of the war, the scientific organization, which had been created in order to liberate men for fighting and munition work, had been preserved, and the hours of work had been cut down to 4, all would have been, 4 hours a day? Are you fucking kidding me? Instead of that, the old chaos was restored. Those whose work was demanded was made to work long hours, and the rest were left to starve as unemployed. Why? Because work is a duty, and man should not receive wages in proportion to what he has produced, but in proportion to his virtue as exemplified by his industry. I don't agree with that. Man should receive wages in proportion to what he has produced. There are several jobs that do that. Right? Per piece jobs, they do that. Independent contractors, they do that all of the time. If I make a bid on building a fence, right? I'm a fence contractor. I get the wages in proportion to what my value is in the market. If I am really, really good, I'm going to get top-end pay. And if I am not really, really good, I'm going to get low-end pay. That's the way that it should work. Unions, for a large part, were the problem with this. Now, unions did a lot of really great things. The fact that we have a 40-hour work week, that is due to unions. Thank you. The fact that we have health benefits, that is due to unions. Thank you. But unions have caused the artificially stagnant wages. You do not rise by virtue in your industry in the union. You rise by the time spent in your industry in the union. That does not equate to the same thing. If I have worked in several union jobs. That's why I can talk about this. If I was a better performer, it did not matter. I could not jump ahead of this guy who was a complete shitbag and did everything he could to avoid work. That is the problem with unions. The fuck the company attitude of most of the unions, right? That is the problem with unions. If it was a beneficial relationship and it was what value can we bring, how can we bring more value to the company, wages would rise. If you, starting out, first job, go to McDonald's, make minimum wage and make yourself valuable, you will make more money. They will come to you with a assistant manager's position. They will come to you with a marketing position. They will come to you with something else because you are adding value above and beyond the people around you. You create your own value. Here in this country, at a very minimum, you create your own value. And if you are making too little, it's up to you to change that. You can become the competition for that. You can seek out other employment with other competition. You can bring value to yourself somewhere else. If you are the hard worker, it will be recognized. Your competition notices that you work hard. And if you leave where you are, your competition will pick you up. That is how it works. The problem that we have is that we're like, I'm working so hard and I'm not being recognized right here, and that's a problem. Somebody needs to make a law. No, you need to carry your ass to somewhere where you're valued. This is the morality of the slave state, applied in circumstances totally unlike those in which it arose. No wonder the result has been disastrous. Let us take an illustration. Suppose that, at a given moment, a certain number of people are engaged in the manufacture of pens. They make as many pens as the world needs, working, say, 8 hours a day. Someone makes an invention by which the same number of men can make twice as many pens as before. But the world does not need twice as many pens. Pens are already so cheap that hardly any more will be bought at a lower price. In a sensible world, everybody concerned in the manufacture of a pen would take to working 4 hours instead of 8, and everything else would go on as before. But in the actual world, this would be thought demoralizing. The men still work 8 hours. There are too many pens. Some employers go bankrupt, and half the men previously concerned in making pens are thrown out of work. There is, in the end, just as much leisure on the other plan, but half the men are totally idle while half are still overworked. In this way, it is ensured that the unavoidable leisure shall cause misery all around, instead of being a universal source of happiness. Can anything more insane be imagined? Well, that was a pretty insane fucking example. In what reality is it even likely that you're producing every pen that needs to be produced? All right, fallacy number one. That is straw man number one. Okay, we'll take it for granted you are producing exactly as many as needed, and we get an optimization that comes in and allows it to be half, right? The immediate thing that would happen is they would produce exactly as many pens as before, and then they would pivot the other part of the workforce into a new endeavor. There is no conceivable way that someone is going to say we are meeting all of the market demands, which is already fucking insane. The market is way too big to ever be fully satisfied, right? Scarcity in that concept does exist, right? Not because there are not enough resources, but because atrophy happens. And so to assume that you're making all of the pens that are necessary, that you would invest money into making double the amount of pens is not going to happen. It is simply not a reality. Nobody in any reality is going to stockpile pens when they are already producing all of the pens that are necessary. It is not going to happen. Nobody is going to put their money into that. Nobody's going to put their effort into that. They're going to buy these machines, and then they're going to find a way to optimize the other half of the workforce that doesn't need to be engaged in this, so that they can find another market for something similar to pens and go from there. Maybe they start with bobby pins, because the difference between a straight pin and a bobby pin is how you kink it. So maybe they find a way to make a machine that produces the same amount of bobby pins as you're producing pins. Like, that's the way that capitalism works. They will find a way to find a new market. To say that they're just going to create and then everybody's going to be out of work is victim mentality. That is building the straw man and knocking it down for no fucking reason. The idea that the poor should have leisure has always been shocking to the rich. In England, in the early 19th century, 15 hours was the ordinary day's work for a man. Children sometimes did as much, and very commonly did 12 hours a day. When meddlesome busybodies suggested that perhaps these hours were rather long, they were told that work kept adults from drink and children from mischief. Now, that is a problem with the nobility. The free market changed that. That is how we got unions. That is how we went to the 40-hour work week. It is because here in the United States, trade unions became a thing in order to break apart this. Granted, it needed to be broken apart. You should have time for idleness, but it should not be your main concern. It shouldn't. When I was a child, shortly after urban working men had acquired the vote, certain public holidays were established by law, to the great indignation of the upper classes. I remember hearing an old duchess say, "What do the poor want with holidays? They ought to work." People nowadays are less frank, but the sentiment persists. It is the source of much of our economic confusion. Let us, for a moment, consider the ethics of work, frankly, without superstition. Every human being of necessity consumes, in the course of his life, a certain amount of the produce of human labor, assuming, as we may, that labor is on the whole disagreeable. No, you may not. It is unjust that a man should consume more than he produces. Of course, he may provide services rather than commodities, like a medical man, for example, but he should provide something in return for his board and lodging. To this extent, the duty of work must be admitted, but to this extent only. Labor on the whole is not disagreeable. There are jobs that are hard. That is true. I have worked several of them. I dug ditches. I roofed houses. I worked in construction. I have pulled concrete. I have done some severely difficult menial jobs. But I was compensated for it in an agreeable manner. I enjoyed the hard work. I was tired. I enjoyed bitching about it, but I didn't really hate the job. If you hate your job, find another one. There are so many opportunities in the land of the free. In the land of capitalism, you can move. You can say, you know what, there's only this one job available here. I'm going to take my chances and go somewhere else. I'm going to find something different to do with my life. I don't like digging ditches. I'm going to see about going to night school. I don't like doing construction, so I'm going to see if I can increase my skill level. Those are all things that you can do. You can change the disagreeable part. There's still going to be a need for disagreeable jobs. Somebody still has to dig the ditches. That's why we pay it. Like, people don't understand that you get paid good money for running a shovel, right? That is a real thing. You get paid good money. You don't get paid minimum wage in the plant. You don't get paid minimum wage in construction. It doesn't happen. Like, you may start off there, but you will not stay there. It is not going to happen because you're going to work. Your level of compensation is up to you. That is your negotiation. And if it is not something that you are agreeable to, you can say no. You're not obligated in the way that even here they were, right? Now, he is making the argument on the other side of changes that we have. And so some of this, it makes sense, right? People did not need to be working 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. That is terrible. But you don't need to work 4 hours a day. That is equally fucking terrible. I shall not dwell upon the fact that in all modern societies outside the USSR, many people escape even this minimum of work, namely, all those who inherit money and all those who marry money. And that does not last long if you are not being productive. If you do not understand this basic fact, I'm going to hit you with it really simple. We have this thing called the lottery here in the United States, and periodically people win enormous amounts of money. Almost every one of those people who have won those enormous amounts of money wind up bankrupt. because they become idle. They try to live simply upon the money that they have with no concept of how money works or how to save or how to budget or how to put the money to work. They just get the money and they think that that is going to solve all of their problems, and it does not, right? That is the same problem with people who inherit money. You normally gain money in the first generation, you multiply it in the second generation, and you lose it by the third. That is normally how it works. People who marry money, even less so. So, this is not a good argument. It's just simply not a good argument. It doesn't work. I do not think the fact that these people are allowed to be idle is nearly so harmful as the fact that wage owners are expected to overwork or starve. If the ordinary wage earner worked 4 hours a day, there would be enough for everybody and no unemployment, assuming a certain very moderate amount of sensible organization. This idea shocks the well-to-do because they are convinced that the poor would not know how to use so much leisure. In America, men often work long hours even when they are already well off. Such men, naturally, are indignant at the idea of leisure for wage earners, except as the grim punishment of unemployment. In fact, they dislike leisure even for their sons. Oddly enough, while they wish their sons to work so hard as to leave no time to be civilized, they do not mind their wives and daughters having no work at all. The snobbish admiration of uselessness which is in an aristocratic society extends to both sexes, is, under a plutocracy, confined to women. This, however, does not make it any more in agreement with common sense. The wise use of leisure, it must be conceded, is a product of civilization and education. A man who has worked long hours all his life will be bored if he becomes suddenly idle, but without a considerable amount of leisure, a man is cut off from many of the best things. There is no longer any reason why the bulk of the population should suffer this deprivation. Only a foolish asceticism, usually vicarious, makes us continue to insist on work and excessive qualities now that the need no longer exists. In the new creed which controls the government of Russia, while there is much that is very different from the traditional teachings of the West, there are some things that are quite unchanged. The attitude of the governing classes, and especially of those who conduct educational propaganda, on the subject of the dignity of labor is almost exactly that which the governing classes of the world have always preached to what were called the honest poor. Industry, sobriety, willingness to work long hours for distant advantages, even submissiveness to authority. All these reappear. Moreover, authority still represents the will of the ruler of the universe, who, however, is now called by a new name, dialectical materialism. The victory of the proletariat in Russia has some points in common with the victory of the feminists in some other countries. For ages, men had conceded the superior saintliness of women and had consoled women for their inferiority by maintaining that saintliness is more desirable than power. At last, the feminists decided that they would have both, since the pioneers among them believed all that the men had told them about the desirability of virtue, but not what they had told them about the worthlessness of political power. A similar thing has happened in Russia as regards manual work. For ages, the rich and the sycophants have ridden in praise of honest toil, have praised the simple life, have professed a religion which teaches that the poor are much more likely to go to heaven than the rich, and in general have tried to make manual workers believe that there is some special nobility, without altering the position of matter in space, just as men tried to make women believe that they derive some special nobility from their sexual enslavement. In Russia, all this teaching about the excellence of manual work has been taken seriously, with the result that the manual worker is more honored than anyone else. Unless you're in the upper part of the government that gets to kill those people. What are, in essence, revivalist appeals are made, but not for the old purposes. They are made to secure shock workers for special tasks. Manual work is the ideal which is held before the young and is the basis of all ethical teaching. For the present, possibly this is all to the good. A large country full of natural resources awaits development and has to be developed with very little use of credit. In these circumstances, hard work is necessary and is likely to bring a great reward. But what will happen when the point has been reached where everybody could be comfortable without working long hours? In the West, we have various ways of dealing with this problem. We have no attempt at economic justice, so that a large proportion of the total produce goes to a small minority of the population, many of whom do no work at all. Owing to the absence of any central control, communism, over production, we produce a host of things that are not wanted. We keep a large percentage of the working population idle because we can dispense with their labors by making the others overwork. A large percentage of the working population is idle, huh? That's an interesting argument. When all these methods prove inadequate, we have a war. We cause a number of people to manufacture high explosives, and a number of others to explode them, as if we were children who had just discovered fireworks. By a combination of all these devices, we manage, though with difficulty, to keep alive the notion that a great deal of severe manual work must be the lot of the average man. In Russia, owing to more the economic justice and central control over production, the problem will have to be differently solved. They solved it quite well, didn't they? The rational solution would be, as soon as the necessities and elementary comforts can be provided for all, to reduce the hours of labor gradually, allowing a popular vote to decide, at each stage, whether more leisure or more goods were to be preferred. But, having taught the supreme virtue of hard work, it is difficult to see how the authorities can aim at a paradise in which there will be much leisure and little work. It seems more likely that they will find, continually, fresh schemes by which present leisure is to be sacrificed to future productivity. I read recently of an ingenious plan put forward by Russian engineers for making the White Sea and the northern coast of Siberia warm by putting a dam across the Kara Sea. An admirable project, but liable to postpone proletarian comfort for a generation, while the nobility of toil is being displayed amid the ice fields and snowstorms of the Atlantic Ocean. This sort of thing, if it happens, will be the result of regarding the virtue of hard work as an end in itself, rather than as a means to a state of affairs in which it is no longer needed. The fact that moving matter about, while a certain amount of it is necessary to our existence, is emphatically not one of the ends of human life. If it were, we should have to consider every navy superior to Shakespeare. We have been misled in this matter by two causes. One is the necessity of keeping the poor contented, which has led the rich, for thousands of years, to preach the dignity of labor, while taking care of themselves to remain undignified in this respect. The other is the new pleasure in mechanism, which makes us delight in the astonishingly clever changes that we can produce on the earth's surface. Neither of these motives makes any great appeal to the actual worker. If you ask him what he thinks the best part of his life, he is not likely to say, "I enjoy manual work because it makes me feel that I am fulfilling man's noblest task, and because I like to think how much man can transform his planet. It is true that my body demands periods of rest, which I have to fill in as best I may. But I am never so happy as when the morning comes and I can return to the toil from which my contentment springs." That's me. That's me. I enjoy manual work. I cannot do it to the level that I would like to do it because of me, right? I was involved in a car wreck, if you weren't familiar, and I have problems. It has not stopped me from attempting to do better, though. For the last 5 years, I've been pushing myself rather hard, and when I started, I couldn't hardly walk. Now, I'm training to run a 5K. I still have problems. I still can't reach out my arms and pick something up. It hurts, right? But I am working on that in the same way that I worked on being mobile. I am working hard, and I get up every single morning ready for that anticipation of the hard work. Maybe I'm the anomaly. Maybe I am, but I'm not. A lot of people like going to work. A lot of people, like, you may not like your particular job. That is a given, right? But many people do. As a matter of fact, I would even venture so far as to say most people do. Not everyone, because it will never be everyone. But they chose that job. Most of them are content in that job. They even get up anticipating that job. That is not to say that they are always happy in that job. There are always some specific reason to complain, especially in this victim mentality mindset that we have on this planet at the current time. But an honest day's work leaves you feeling content. When you, even if it is for yourself, right? You get up and you bust your ass and you plow and you plant and you water and you weed and you harvest. You go to bed feeling content. You have worked hard, and that feels good. It really does. We have gotten into the mindset here in the States, but worldwide as well, that we should be forcing ourselves to go through the work so that we can get to the idle time and just sit on our ass and watch a screen for 4 or 5 hours before we drift off to sleep and not have a good content day of sleep. You should be striving to be the best in your profession. That should be your goal. Is it going to be everyone's goal? No, but it should be. And if it is your goal to be the best in your profession, you're going to get more money. It will happen. You will be more valuable than the guy who is just working to go home. It will happen. And then when you get the promotion and they don't, they're going to complain that you are just a try-hard. They're going to complain that you're a company man. They're going to complain that because you took the initiative to make your life better, it's automatically making theirs worse because they didn't take the initiative. Hard work is rewarding. Not always immediately, but always over time. Hard work is rewarding. On a personal level and a professional level, on a satisfaction level and a monetary level, hard work is rewarding. That is not to say that you should not have idle time. I would not have been able to do many of the things that I do without idle time. But when I was writing a book, that was not idle time. That was an endeavor. It was not a physical endeavor. I didn't wear my body out, but I wore my mind out. When I go through concepts and learn new things, it is still an endeavor. It is still physically draining, even though it is not physical activity. I am learning a skill. That is an endeavor. That does take work. That is hard, laborious activity. I've never heard of working man say this sort of thing. They consider work, as it should be considered, a necessary means to a livelihood, and it is from their leisure hours that they derive whatever happiness they may enjoy. That is a mindset. That is a mindset. It will be said that, while a little leisure is pleasant, men would not know how to fill their days if they had only 4 hours of work out of the 24. Insofar as this is true in the modern world, it is a condemnation of our civilization. It would not have been true at any earlier period. There was formerly a capacity for lightheartedness and play which has been to some extent inhibited by the cult of efficiency. That was only for the aristocracy. There is this misconception that 400 years ago, in the days of peasantry, people worked less hard. That is stupid. That is not true in any way, shape, or form. They endeavored strenuously through most of their days to ensure that they would have sufficient food for the winter. Even during the winter, they still had to strive making repairs to clothing. They had to make repairs to their facilities. They had to ensure that their grain was not going to spoil due to climate. They had to make sure that their animals were still cared for. The fact that most people think that people were idle back in history is not true, right? You have not done any reflection on what the conditions were, right? Water was not a guarantee in people's lives. You had to make sure that you had water. That is effort. You had to make sure that the animals had water. Again, effort. You have to make sure that your food is prepared in the correct manner and that the animals had food. Like, there was so many things that are involved in. You had to carry firewood in. You had to go gather firewood. You know how hard it is to carry a log from over there to over here? It is difficult, even with an animal to assist you. This concept that at some point people were just leisurely is not true and has never been true in the history of history. Right? There's never been a point in time where the common man was able to do that. Did they have times when they took off for leisure? Yes. Did they play baseball every other day? No. Did they have the capacity to go biking for hours just because it was fun? No. They were able to get together once a month, once every 2 or 3 months, and to have a community activity so that they could have socialization and interact with other people. Because most of the time, you did not even see your neighbors for weeks at a time unless there was some issue that intervened. You did not have sports associations unless you were wealthy. You did not have the capacity to bring your child to play t-ball. That was not a thing, right? Despite the fact that the sport didn't exist. That was not something that people regularly participated in. It was a 2 or 3 times a year activity. There was no leisure time just for the hell of it. But generally speaking, you did have a few hours of the day that were yours. When you got up and you got to eat your breakfast, you had a little bit of time for yourself. When you got done with your day's productivity, which you decided when it was generally later in the evening, and you went home and you relaxed in front of the fireplace until you fell asleep. Generally, not long afterwards. There was no stretches of leisure. That was not a thing. If you didn't work, you didn't eat. If you didn't work, you didn't stay warm. If you didn't work, you didn't have water. If you didn't work, you didn't exist. That is human. That is what we do. That is, like, we're different from the animals because we plan ahead, right? We don't just dig a hole in the soil and burrow in and stay there. We build houses so that we're protected from the elements. We don't just, get the food for today and that's enough. We store up enough food to get us through the winter because we have the concept of time and we have the ability to cognize that time is important. And if we don't make preparation for it now, we will suffer for it later. That is what we do. That is hard work. There are times for idleness. You should every single day have time to do something fun, but not for the bulk or the majority of your time. And if you have it, you're not going to use it productively. You're not. And if you don't believe that, let me give you an example. What did you do this past Saturday? Like, what was your deal this past Saturday? Right now it is January the 9th, right? Most people, right? I'm not saying this is necessarily you, but most people sat on their ass and watched movies or played video games, which is fine. That is your idle time, right? But if you sat down and you watched 12 hours worth of movies, that is exactly what you would do. You would not better yourself in any particular way. Now, me, I am different than most people, and I accept that. I accept that most people are not even going to care for my opinion. I am fine with that. I put it out here, and the people who seek knowledge will find it. But I am constantly looking to improve myself. I don't watch TV because, one, it is trash. It is all about lying, cheating, stealing, and fornicating. I don't have time for that shit. But part two, I'm looking to better myself. I listen to lectures on psychology. I listen to lectures on fundamental mathematic concepts. I listen to applied mathematics. I listen to political discourse. I listen to various things that are meant to bring value to my life. Even if that value is not immediate, I am assimilating new information. I am constantly trying to learn something new. And when I am not actively sitting here trying to learn something new, I am putting things into motion. I am planting, I am cleaning, I am cooking, I am doing various things. Most people are sitting on their ass exactly as much as they possibly can, and that is what you would do at idleness. You would not improve yourself. You would not improve society. Everybody's like, well, if I had more time, I would write a book. And that's a fucking lie. You would not. Well, if I had more time, I would learn to paint. That's a lie. You would not. You would sit on your ass and watch Netflix. That is what you are going to do. And it is compounded by our complexity. It is more difficult now to be gainfully engaged in something than it has ever been. There are too many distractions. Me, right here, right now, I'm a distraction. I'm attempting to help you to learn something new, so it's not as bad as just sitting here and being like some of these videos are pretty fucking useless. I am attempting to engage in discourse, so at least I am doing something that can be considered gainful, and you listening to me can be considered gainful because we are attempting to increase knowledge. But for the most part, people are not. People are lazy. They just want to sit on their ass, watch TV, and stuff contaminants into their face. That is what we have gotten from idleness. We have not gotten a better society. We have not gotten anything better. People always say that they would do better if they had more time, and that is a lie. Just as much as they say, if I had more money, I would fix the roads. No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. And if you would, your neighbor won't. The modern man thinks that everything ought to be done for the sake of something else, and never for its own sake. Serious-minded persons, for example, are continually condemning the habit of going to the cinema, and telling us that it leads the young into crime. But all the work that goes into producing a cinema is respectable because it is work, and because it brings a money profit. Well, the argument can definitely be made, right, that it leads the young into crime. You can argue that all you want, but you can track pretty successfully the degradation of moral capacity in an entertainment setting, right? When movies came out, they had to meet certain requirements of a moral nature. Over time, we have allowed that to be eroded, so that now there is pretty good trash on the TV. But you can track right alongside that degradation in moral capacity in entertainment the exact same trend in the actuality of society. As entertainment has degraded and people have become less respectable in that particular endeavor, society has tracked right along with that. And you can make the argument that it is not entertainment's fault, and you can entertain that argument, but it doesn't make it true. Video games do not cause violence. That is true. But your unintentional absorption of those allows that to become the normal, right? Grand Theft Auto does not make anyone go out and commit a crime. But because you're playing a game for 5, 6, 12 hours a day, which glorifies the crimes being committed, those things become a little bit less unacceptable to you, right? You hear, oh, well, that's just a prostitute. They're just trying to get their money, right? That's a moral degradation. That prostitution is one of the oldest forms of economic advancement that we have. But it is not exactly a morally great thing for a variety of reasons, disease being one of them, unwanted pregnancy being another. There are a lot of reasons why it is not the best, right? The best would be a loving, committed relationship with one singular person. But because of things like Grand Theft Auto, and I'm using that as an example, not as the whole typification, but because of that, it has become acceptable, right? Well, it's okay that she shows her butthole to the internet for a few dollars. I mean, that's no big deal, right? There's no serious consequences to flaying open your vajayjay and getting penetrated by some plastic object attached to the wall. Like, that's got no detrimental effects on society whatsoever. We've gotten to the point where it's okay to go and steal. You can go into a store and just take what you want because insurance exists. The insurance will take care of it. They're a multi-corporation. They're multinational. They have the ability and the resources. It's perfectly fine. Those are directly because of our entertainment. That is directly because of the things that we consume. You become what you consume. And Back then, when he is talking about, they had those standards of production. You were not allowed to put immoral material on. And if you were, it was in a detrimental light. If somebody was a thief, they got caught. They didn't get away with it. They weren't glorified in the manner that we do now. The notion that the desirable activities are those that bring a profit has made everything topsy-turvy. The butcher who provides you with meat and the baker who provides you with bread are praiseworthy because they are making money. But when you enjoy the food they have provided, you are merely frivolous, unless you eat only to get strength for your work. Now that is a mindset thing. That right there is not what I think. Right? It is not what anyone that I know thinks. Oh, you're eating? What is wrong with you? How dare you not be gainfully employed and working hard right this moment? No. Spend your fucking money. If you want a lavish, luxurious meal, fucking spend your money on it. That's why we have capitalism. You know what you don't get to do in communism or socialism? Go to the fucking restaurant. Broadly speaking, it is held that getting money is good and spending money is bad. And again, that is not true. That is straw man. That is fallacious information. That is simply not true. Nobody is saying that. Getting money is good, yes, but spending money is not bad. Who says that? Who says, oh, well, spending your hard-earned gains in the manner that you want is not right? Like, even I don't say that. I hate the entertainment industry. I don't find any value in it, but you are more than welcome to have a Netflix subscription. You are more than welcome to peruse Amazon, even though it is leading to the fall of civilization. Do what you want. Seeing that they are two sides of one transaction, this is absurd. One might as well maintain that keys are good, but keyholes are bad. That is true. You are making the exact same fallacious argument there. Whatever merit there may be in the production of goods may be entirely derivative from the advantage to be obtained by consuming them. The individual, in our society, works for profit, but the social purpose of his work lies in the consumption of what he produces. It is this divorce between the individual and the social purpose of production that makes it so difficult for men to think clearly in a world in which profit-making is the incentive to industry. We think too much of production and too little of consumption. One result is that we attach too little importance to enjoyment and simple happiness, and that we do not judge production by the pleasure that it gives to the consumer. And again, I don't think that is necessarily true either. I believe that is the mindset of the people who were around him, and God knows he had a victim mindset. When I suggest that working hours should be reduced to 4, I am not meaning to imply that all the remaining time should necessarily be spent in pure frivolity. I mean that 4 hours work a day should entitle a man to the necessities and elementary comforts of life, and that the rest of his time should be his to use as he might see fit. It is an essential part of any such social system that education should be carried further than it usually is at present, and should aim, in part, at providing tastes which would enable a man to use leisure intelligently. That is personal responsibility. That is not the responsibility of the government. I am not thinking mainly of the sort of things that would be considered highbrow. Peasant dances have died out except in remote rural areas, but the impulses which cause them to be cultivated must still exist in human nature. The pleasures of urban populations have become mainly passive, seeing cinemas, watching football matches, listening to the radio, and so on. This results from the fact that their active energies are fully taken up with work. If they had more leisure, they would again enjoy pleasures in which they took an active part. And again, that is a fallacious argument. That is a straw man. And it is provably untrue. I've already given the examples of that, right? Just because you have the time does not mean that you will use it wisely. Even if there are better options, and like we live in the age of information, you can pick up one of these and you can have any information that you want at your fingertips instantly. And yet people choose ignorance every single day. In the past, there was a small leisure class and a larger working class. The leisure class enjoyed advantages for which there was no basis in social justice. This necessarily made it oppressive, limited its sympathies, and caused it to invent theories by which to justify its privileges. These facts greatly diminished its excellence, but in spite of this drawback, it contributed nearly all the whole of what we call civilization. It cultivated the arts and discovered the sciences. It wrote the books, invented the philosophies, and refined social relations. No. Even the liberation of the oppressed has usually been inaugurated from above. Without the leisure class, mankind would never have emerged from barbarism. No, because if we had not emerged from barbarism, there would be no leisure class. That is cyclical, right? Until the point where we emerged from where you did not have to worry about being raided at every turn of the hat, which is why we have governments, by the way. Until we got to the point where we were relatively safe, there was no time for leisure. That is simply a truth. Until we got to the point where we could put away enough food, and that has only been in the last 100 years or so, like maybe 150. I'm getting old, but until the industrial agricultural revolution, like chemical fertilizers, which happened after World War II, until that point, we were really just surviving. Right? The early America, as free as it was bound up in survival. You were attempting to ensure you had food. That was the consumption of your time. And if somebody was coming to take your food, which was what barbarism is, then your efforts were wasted. So you had to develop both the means to overcome the winter and the people to protect your food. That is where we got the class of warrior. It's because they were protecting you from raids. Now, do we use that effectively? Not necessarily. But, like, you hear the anarcho-capitalist all the time talking about, well, we don't need the government, we don't need the military, and that is dumb. And here is the reason why that is dumb. Because I am more brutal than you are. You may fully believe that if government was disbanded, everybody would act on their best behavior, but I know better. I come from a life of criminality. If you were unaware with the origin story, I grew up, my father was a drug runner for a cartel, or not a cartel, a family, out of New Orleans in the 80s, 70s, 80s. My entire young adult life was consumed with illegal activities, searching for various substances, selling those substances, evading the law in very real ways, right? If society were to break down and there were no government, I am coming to take your shit. I am the guy who is going to do it. I am not going to let my family starve. Now, I'm going to endeavor to plant. I am going to endeavor to raise animals. But if I am unable to do that, I am taking your shit. And I can get enough help that I can do it. I can talk persuasively. I have a little bit of charisma. Not a whole lot, but I got a little bit. And I can talk people into doing things. I was a leader in criminality. I organized people taking other people's stuff. That has happened in my life. I can do it again. If my survival depends upon it, I did it just so I could have money to buy dope. Do you think I wouldn't do it so my kids could eat? I'm going to kill you. I'm going to take your things. I am the guy. There are people worse than me, but I will do it. That is what happens if government disappears. If, by some miracle, the entirety of the world says, you know what, we're going to do away with governments. We're going to get rid of all the standing armies. All of the arms are going to go away. Somebody's going to keep some arms. And that person, the one who decides he's going to keep arms, he's going to hide them, he's going to wind up the winner. That is what happens without government. The strong guy comes and takes your shit. Every single time. That is how it works. Every single time. The method of a hereditary leisure class without duties was, however, extraordinarily wasteful. That is true. Right? I'm not a fan of anybody being idle, and that includes people who have money. None of the members of the class had been taught to be industrious, and the class, as a whole, was not exceptionally intelligent. The class might produce one Darwin, but against him had to be set tens of thousands of country gentlemen who never thought of anything more intelligent than fox hunting and punishing poachers. At present, the universities are supposed to provide, in a more systemic way, what the leisure class provided accidentally and as a byproduct, and that did not happen. This is a great improvement, but it has certain drawbacks. University life is so different from life in the world at large that men who live in an academic milieu tend to be unaware of the preoccupations and problems of ordinary men and women. That is entirely true today. Right. Having a degree does not guarantee intelligence. It guarantees that you spent the time and you towed the line in such a way that they gave you a piece of paper. Once upon a time, you had to desire knowledge to go to a school. Now, it is an expectation that you will go to a school and that they will force you to accept knowledge. And that is not how it works. If you are not genuinely interested in the topic you are being held to account for, it does you no good. When I worked in the construction industry, I had an intern that worked for me. He was a great guy, a little bit lazy, but he was otherwise a great guy. He's an engineer now. He is literally designing things that people place their life upon, and he had to cheat to do percentages. And that is a real thing. Like, he didn't know how to make a percentage happen, right? He didn't know that you had to divide this by this to get the answer. He didn't know that. He had to cheat to get that. And he has a degree. He literally can't do percentages, but he can build you a fucking building. That is academia. Moreover, their ways of expressing themselves are usually such as to rob their opinions of the influence that they ought to have upon the general public. Another disadvantage in that is that universities are organized, and the man who thinks of some original line of research is likely to be discouraged. That is also true. If you are unaware, the peer review system, while it serves a purpose and should be a thing, is severely corrupted. If you go with a theory and provable, trackable evidence that contradicts a current theory, you are shut down. You're not allowed to peer review. That has examples, right? If you were unaware of the electric universe, they have literally reproduced planets. Now, not to scale, but in a lab, they have used electricity to form the correct... I'm trying to think of how to phrase it exactly right, but I'm probably not going to do it. But they have formulated experiments which allow the reproduction of the conditions of the world forming. They can reproduce mountain ranges due to plasmic activity. They can build river systems, right? The Grand Canyon, excellent example, almost certainly is not due to erosion. You can believe that that narrative is true, but there is significant scientific research which says that the Grand Canyon was probably formed by a plasmic discharge on a grand solar level. That's not like a strike of lightning, but imagine, if you will, lightning 15 miles long. That affects the topography of the planet, and they have reproduced this in a lab in ways that are significantly contributing to the understanding that it is probably conditional to how the planet is currently formatted. Right? It is almost certain that the Grand Canyon is not due to erosion. But those people who have produced reproducible effects cannot get peer-reviewed. They are shut out because they are told, nope, it's erosion. You cannot say anything different. That's what he's talking about here. That disadvantage still exists, and not only does it still exist, it is amplified greatly since the 30s. Academic institutions, therefore, useful as they are not adequate guardians of the interest of civilization in a world where everyone outside their walls is too busy for non-utilitarian pursuits. In a world where no one is compelled to work more than 4 hours a day, every person possessed of scientific curiosity will be able to indulge it, and every painter will be able to paint without starving, however excellent his pictures may be. And we have already addressed this, and it is still not true. If you have the idleness, you will almost certainly spend your time in that idleness, doing absolutely nothing. If you want to paint, you will paint in the 1 hour that you have. That is what will happen. If you want to write a book, you will write that book in the 1 hour that you have. You will sit down for 1 hour a day and write it until it is done. And then you will be rewarded for your efforts. But if you had 6 hours a day and you're not writing a book with your 1 hour a day, you're not going to write it with 6 hours. You will find a reason to sit on your ass. That is how humans work. Unless you are motivated to do the thing regardless, you are not going to do the thing even if you have the ample opportunity. You think you will. It's so funny. Like, I am self-motivated. I am self-driven. I have published a book. It was not great. You don't need to go try and find it. But I sat down and did it. I know the effort that is involved in it, and most people will not. Most people will not even take care of the maintenance in their house. Right? They will complain about having to cut the grass in their yard. They will complain about having to insulate their windows. They will complain about the slightest little inconvenience for something that they are responsible for. They are not going to go above and beyond. Right? I have a whole video game that I am working on. It sounds a little bit conceited to say this, but it is better than any of the other games. Like anything that is out there, I have a better storyline. I have better consistency. I have better systems. I don't have the technical knowledge that it takes to put that into a format. So I have offered all kinds of people, right? I learned everything that I learned in building this video game from the internet free. And I've offered, hey, if you want to learn this one particular part, you can be a part of this project. They will learn that one particular part. As simple as it is, right? It is just saving me time for you to do this thing. So I'm willing to cut you in on the end product for you doing this one thing. They won't do it. And that is most people. Most people are not driven to be above and beyond. And that is why some people succeed and others don't. If you're not taking the time now, when you have 1 hour of idle time and you sit on your ass doing nothing, when you have 6 hours, you're going to sit for 6 hours. If you have 12 hours, you're going to sit for 12 hours. It is proven. How many marathons have you watched on Netflix? And if not you, you're on here, you're at least seeking information. How about your spouse? How about your neighbor? How about your children? Are they actively engaged in bettering themselves in the way that you are by watching this video? No, they're not. They're engaged in idleness. And that's not even a horrible thing, but it is a true thing. They work 8 hours, they come home, they sit for 4. That's how they do it. They don't have that drive, and so they won't be successful. They're not trying to learn to paint. They're not trying to learn something new. It is the age of information. You can have everything at your fingertips, and people choose ignorance. Young writers will not be obliged to draw attention to themselves by sensational potboilers with a view to acquiring the economic independence needed for monumental works, for which, when the time at last comes, they will have lost the taste and the capacity. Men who, in their professional work, have become interested in some phase of economic or government will be able to develop their ideas without the academic detachment that makes the work of the university economist often seem lacking in reality. Medical men will have time to learn about the progress of medicine. Teachers will not be exasperatedly struggling to teach by routine methods things which they learnt in their youth, which may, in the interval, have been proved to be untrue. Like, here's another thing, right? Teachers will not be exasperatedly struggling to teach by routine methods things which they learnt in their youth, which may, in the interval, have been proved to be untrue. We live in an age of leisure. You may not understand that. You may think that you work too hard, and it may even be that you do work too hard, right? If you're working a 16-hour shift every day, you're working too hard. If you're working a 12-hour shift every day, 6 times a week, you're working too hard. That is true. But here is another truth that most people are not going to understand. Almost all professionals are behind in their continuing education. What that means is, your doctor, let's call it a podiatrist, right? Your podiatrist, who is in the study of feet, almost certainly is not current on the science of podiatry. They may have some intimation that, well, they're researching this and maybe we'll get some results, but the chances are we've already got the results and you are just unaware of it. That is an endemic problem. That is scattered in every single profession. It is almost certain that if you have had your certificate for longer than 5 years, you are behind, probably by 4 years. There have been advancements in your profession that you are unaware of. It happens every single day. Most people who hold a professional degree are not even current in their profession. That is true. Some people endeavor to make it different, right? Doctors are held to a certain standard of continuing education. And in that required standard of continuing education, which, by the way, would be extra hours of work, they still don't get all that they need to know. There are new developments every single day. That is true for engineers. That is true for kitchen staff. There is an improvement that you are unaware of in your field. And most people are not even concerned with that. My wife suffers from something called endometriosis. That means that the material that makes up the uterine wall is acting in unusual ways. It has become a free radical in her intestinal system, right? Exterior of the intestines, but it attaches to the intestines like hooks. And it attaches to the lungs. Same manner. It's like super glue inside of your stomach. Almost no gynecologists who are the professional in charge of that particular disease have any clue how to treat it. They still think that you can give them anti-inflammatories and, in extreme cases, go in with a surgical knife and cut it out. It's not going to work. There has been for a decade, 10 years, there's been a group in Florida who have advanced endometriosis research to such a case that they have cured people, which is not a thing that happens in normal life. Right? Normally, they do the surgery, they go in there, they cut it out, and it comes back worse. Almost every single time. It is not effective to cut it out in the manner that they do. It takes a team of highly specialized surgeons to go in and get all of it at one point. You have to go through a rigorous multi-hour surgery with a lot of specialists in order to get this out. It is a known, provable, trackable thing that they are curing people from this. And almost no gynecologists know it. It is something that they are solely responsible for understanding and making sure that it happens. And they will tell you that it's IBS, but you just got bowels, right? Your bowels are acting up. It has nothing to do with the fact that your bowels are attached to your lung through this super glue with hooks. That is a problem. Idleness is not going to solve that problem. If you have the extra time to study, you're not going to take it. That's how it works. Above all, there will be happiness and joy of life, instead of frayed nerves, weariness, and dyspepsia. Okay, let's attack that. You think idleness is going to make you happy? I am on Social Security disability, right? That is one of those systems that is a safety net, and I am so very thankful for it. But there are a lot of people out there just like me. I would venture millions here in the United States who are disabled in a permanent fashion in the same way that I am. Right? I am endeavoring to remove myself from that, but as of now, I am still permanently disabled. I still have things that do not allow me to go to work in the manner that I used to. Out of those millions of people, how many do you suspect are probably trying to make themselves better? I'll give you a second to think about it. Drop it in the comments. Let me know what your number would be, because I'm going to tell you it is pretty close to zero. Right? I am the exception to the rule, and I understand again that is conceited to say, but it is true. Me endeavoring to get off of Social Security is absolutely not the normal. Most people who fight to get on Social Security fight to stay on Social Security, and they will do anything not to get caught exercising. They will do anything not getting caught trying to alleviate their pain, because then they would lose their idleness. It doesn't bring them happiness. Almost all of them suffer from depression and anxiety. Almost all of them. They are on medication for that. Almost all of them. That is not happiness and joy of life or idleness. This is something, again, provable and trackable. They still have frayed nerves, weariness, and dyspepsia. That is, again, provable and trackable. They self-report it. Idleness does not bring happiness. Hard work does. The work exacted will be enough to make leisure delightful, but not enough to produce exhaustion. Since men will not be tired in their spare time, they will not demand only such amusements as are passive and vapid. At least 1% will probably devote the time not spent in professional work to pursuits of some public importance, and since they will not depend upon these pursuits for their livelihood, their originality will be unhampered, and there will be no need to conform to the standards set by elderly pundits. But it is not only in these exceptional cases that the advantages of leisure will appear. Ordinary men and women having the opportunity of a happy life will become more kindly and less persecuting and less inclined to view others with suspicion. Again, provably and trackably untrue. The taste for war will die out. Again, provably and trackably untrue. As idleness increased, we are still in forever wars. Partly for this reason, and partly because it will involve long and severe work for all. Good nature is, of all moral qualities, the one that the world needs most. And good nature is the result of ease and security, not a life of arduous struggle. Modern methods of production have given us the possibility of ease and security for all. We have chosen, instead, to have overwork for some and starvation for the others. Hitherto, we have continued to be as energetic as we were before there were machines. In this, we have been foolish, but there is no reason to go on being foolish forever. And that is going to bring us to the end of the praise of idleness. Now, hopefully I have brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of somewhat difficult topics. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs and that I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something that I apologize for. Truth is truth and real is real and facts are facts whether you like them or not. The fact is that socialism does not work. It is only a half step towards communism, and communism does not work. Bertrand Russell, for the beginning part of his life, was an atheist, right? He didn't believe in God at all, and then he became an agnostic who did not care about God. He was a proponent for communism until the Holodomor, and he figured out that maybe this isn't a good thing, so he took the half step and he moved to socialism. He was not a consistent thinker. He was prone to fallacious thinking, and while in mathematics is not that big of a deal, right? Being able to think in unconventional ways is a good thing. Being able to make the argument for and against something, absolutely a good thing. But if you cannot understand the against part of your argument, you're doing it wrong. That is fallacious. You are building a straw man, as he did so often in this particular study. You cannot make the argument of all, right? I have in here a couple of times, but that was to prove the point that it is a bad argument. All does not work. There are exceptions to everything. To think that simply because you have more time on your hands that you will use that time wisely is not correct. It is provably incorrect. Our current society is idle focused. It is all about, let me work the minimum amount I can at my job and then go home and do as little as I can possibly get away with. That is what our mindset is, and that is our problem. Bertrand Russell is just the epitome of that, right? He was just stupid enough to put it on paper. He's not the first one. He won't be the last one. But there are very good arguments against everything that he put in here. Some of it, not grant, some of it is a good idea, right? You should not be working 16 hours a day every day. You should not. And if you are, you need a different job. You need to invest in yourself. You should not be working 12 hours a day every day, but you should be working 8. And that is not to say that the weekends are not yours to sit on your ass. You can do that. But if you are not happy in your position at work, you should not be sitting on your ass. You should be doing something to improve yourself, especially if you're young, right? You made a decision at 18 that you were going to go into this field. And while you were 18 to 25, it was a great field. You were perfectly content. But now you're getting a little bit older and it's a little bit harder. You need to find something else to do. You need to take the initiative to improve your value in the market so that you can move to a management position, so that you can find a different field entirely, something that you enjoy doing. There are so many jobs out there. You can create brand new jobs without interference from the government. You get to just decide, you know what? This need is not being met. I'm going to do it. I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to build this thing. I'm going to make this happen. You get the choice for that. Other people don't. There are places where the government tells you what your job will be. And back then, that was still a thing in a lot of places. We have advanced to the point where idleness is a thing. And sometimes not doing anything or just doing something for fun is perfectly fine. But most of the time, you should be endeavoring to improve your situation. And that's where I'm going to leave this. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that I have said. Drop it in the comments, and as long as it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you have another work you would like to see me work through in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments. We will deal with that as well. If you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks, because I am not a communist or a socialist. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.